welcome. This is a difficult topic, overcoming the obstacles to Dharma practice. And by Dharma practice, I mean mostly sitting meditation. And then during the day, mindfulness meditation. And few enough people do the practice, so there are obstacles. The first obstacle is having any contact with a meditational circle. In that regard, we're very fortunate because we have connected with a place where meditation happens. Out there beyond our borders, there are a lot of people that think meditation is a good thing but know nothing about it. So the first obstacle is ignorance of what it is and where to practice it, how to practice it. And we're in the boat where we've been drawn into a group where the practice of meditation is possible. So why aren't people doing it more? One reason is that a beginner tries meditation and discovers that the mind is like a waterfall. The crazy mind just will not stop. So they think, I'm terrible at this, I can't do it, and then they go away. The fact of the matter is, everybody's mind, at least sometime, is a waterfall. And most people don't know that about themselves, that the mind is totally out of control with one association after another, one thought after another. You don't even have to be present for the thought stream to go on and on. You can be asleep on automatic pilot and the association stream still goes on. So getting used to that is one of the first steps, accepting that as the current reality. And then if you keep going at the meditation, advisable would be at least 10 minutes, 20 minutes is better, half hour better yet, to give the mind time to settle, because it does settle. And eventually, that waterfall, that cascade of thoughts, slows down and it becomes merely rapids, if you think of the analogy of a stream. And then you meditate further and longer, and it slows down to a meandering river, and then it reaches a calm ocean. So that's the progression. But sadly, most people don't get past the waterfall stage for one reason or another. So lack of access is the first problem. With access, but sufficient mental barriers to not even try it, or to try it as a secondary thing, because we do that here, so we sit once in a while. Better than nothing, because at least we're getting used to the form. But if we want to have 24/7 mindfulness, which is the ultimate goal of mindfulness meditation, we need to do the practice more often, and ideally every day. Pick a time in the morning that's suitable, or in the evening if it's better, and just sit every day at the same time. Easier said than done, but it's doable. In my experience, what happened was I would put it in place and sit for a while, and it would go away. And I'd bring it back and sit for a while, and it would go away again. I just didn't feel like doing it, or something came up. And the fourth or fifth or sixth time that I stubbornly put it back in place, then it sticks. And then you're slightly uncomfortable if you don't do it on a given morning. So the whole movie changes when you get used to sitting constantly. And that enhances the efforts during the day to be mindful. And there are all kinds of tricks that can be used. You can slow down emotion. If you think, mindful, then the next few motions, if you do them slow, that interrupts the automatic habit pattern. You can walk slowly or walk more intentionally. Mindfulness really has to do with doing things intentionally rather than automatically. To be aware of the body in the present moment. And any technique you can use that enhances that is a good technique. Like a practice I was given that I do fairly often. When I get into a car, I take 5 deep breaths and try to be mindful. And when I get out of the car, same thing. 5 deep breaths, try to be mindful. Sometimes I forget. Sometimes I do it automatically. But to be mindful, it can't be automatic. It has to be intentional. You have to be in the present moment. And again, the sitting meditation amplifies that effort to be mindful. When you sit regularly, you have more moments of mindfulness during the day and less reactivity, less automatic behavior. So that's the overall goal. I'll say that obstacle has been overcome, that you decided, okay, you're going to meditate often as possible. Then the next obstacle is that the mind gets to a place where it does not want to watch itself. That's a primary obstacle. I don't know if it happens to everybody or not. It seems to me like it does. And that resistance has to be overcome. That's where you have to bring some will and some determination into the mix. Because the resistance increases as you sit. Because you begin to discover things about yourself you might not like. And you have to accept those things as they come up. You have to deal with whatever comes up in the course of your meditation. So to overcome that initial reactivity of the mind is a landmark in the effort to meditate rightly. And then, once you're sitting regularly, and the reactivity isn't too bad, so you continue the habit of sitting, then, as I say, it gets to be a habit, and the result is it's easy to do. This is the thing about meditation that most beginners don't realize, that if you do it long enough, you gain a real zest for sitting. And it's a joy to sit on the cushion. But that happens only after you get rid of the pain in the knees, which is going to take 6 months, and various other obstacles. So that, guaranteed that can happen if you keep at it. But it's a matter of perseverance. So once the mind is calm enough, then you begin to get glimmers of gaps between thoughts. If the thoughts slow down enough, you begin to see other phenomena that you weren't previously aware of, because the moments are filled with automatic habits. So you empty those moments out and you begin to see gaps between the thoughts. And the clear light is in those gaps. The emptiness is in those gaps. And apparently, the way the mind works, a experience arises. It lasts a little while, 10,000th of a second maybe, and then it decays into emptiness. So you have that gap. And then the next thought or experience arises, or emotion, and that stays a little while and decays into emptiness. So, and the emptiness is a little bit like a little death. So that gap is always with us, but we overlook it. We fill it with associations from the surface mind. So one of the possibilities then of a consistent meditation is that the mind slows down enough that you can perceive those gaps. And then you get thoughtless concentration, which is again a goal, a concentration without a conceptual elaboration of any sort. And the mind gets very calm and steady, and the moment of consciousness seems to last longer. I don't know if it actually does, but it seems like it does. So there are all those benefits to continuing, but again, obstacles. Okay. One of the main difficulties in practice is a low level of motivation. Our intent may be to practice, then something comes up of a higher priority. It may be necessary to raise the priority of Dharma practice. Having Dharma practice at a low priority almost guarantees that you're not going to sit. So, we have to be serious enough about it that we'll put the necessary energy of will into it to do it regularly, or to do it during the day when you think of it. Oh, mindful. Well, right then. Anytime you notice, the sitting process, you concentrate on the object of meditation. In our case, we use the breath. And the mind's going to wander. When it wanders, you bring it gently back to the breath. And it's that constant motion of noticing and returning. And that moment of noticing is a moment of mindfulness. It's like, oh, I was daydreaming. I'm meditating now, not daydreaming. And the struggle goes on. But as I say, you get to a place where you get in the zone. And it's marvelous. It's peaceful to meditate. Everything's working. The pain in the knees has gone away, or we put up with it, whatever the case may be. And you can get into a really pleasant space of meditation. But that's not the goal. The goal is to open up some understanding. And that in two ways: the understanding of the non-conceptual consciousness, and the understanding of how to continue a concentrated meditation. Then there's other Dharma practices where the same sort of thing applies. Well, it's rainy and cold and dark today, so I won't go into Thursday. So we have these natural barriers to even starting a practice. And, an example, you took the trouble to show up here to hear the Dharma. That took a little bit of pre-planning and a little bit of effort. And all of that counts towards the practice if we overcome the various barriers and obstacles. Now I'm going to dive into the meditation practice. So assume then that we're sitting half an hour in the morning, and we've been doing that for a while, 6 months, say, and we're wrestling with our thoughts, with our constant association pattern. By then, it should have slowed down enough that we get some results. Okay, another difficulty is forgetfulness. I might set a goal. Say I want to stop 20 times a day. Just stop and be mindful. Now that's harder than it sounds. It's actually a Dzogchen practice to bring everything to a full stop. The thinking, the breathing, everything. And to do that 20 times a day. Every time I tried it, and I don't think I'm alone in this, I'd remember 3, 4, 5 times. And then forget all about it. And hours later I would think, oh, I was doing that exercise, but I didn't do it anymore because I forgot. And, again, we have to be very balanced and judicious about this. On the one hand, it's not acceptable to have the mind in those conditions. On the other hand, that's what it is, and we have to have a certain measure of acceptance. In other words, not like the beginners do, beat ourselves up over the fact that our minds are crazy. Everybody's mind is crazy. It's a matter of getting used to it and working around it, and then using techniques to slow down the stream of thoughts enough so that you can begin to perceive the world around you in a clear way. Most of us are living in a world of our imagination because our thoughts fill in the gaps and we're not perceiving what's really there. We're perceiving what we imagine is there. And remedying that constitutes Dharma practice in its many forms. People did a really good Chenrezig this morning. There were 6 of us or so. And that practice is similar. It's a peaceful tantric practice. it was done with a considerable amount of zest today, partly because the people that show up practically every Saturday. So that's an example of a practice that's working well. Even though I got to admit I daydream during it. The daydream is part of the human condition. But we want to be aware of it, and without beating ourselves up, we want to create a new kind of consciousness, which is a consciousness that is aware but not conceptual. And the various Dharma techniques that we use to get to that place are myriad, actually. But the cornerstone is sitting meditation. Okay, so we get the forgetfulness to practice. Like this morning, I was distracted. I forgot to sit. And I was pressed for time. Okay, great. I didn't sit this morning. But I'll sit tomorrow morning. And this is not to be into procrastination. I want to actually sit tomorrow morning. Procrastination is one of the enemies of Dharma practice. It's like, well, I'm too busy right now to practice, but when things slow down, I'll practice. Or, I've been working 50 hours a week. When I retire, I'll practice. And putting it off to the future for various reasons assures that we won't practice now. And the fact is, now is the only time to practice. The now moment is the one to cultivate, the one to focus on. The past is gone. Find your body in the past. You can't be solidly in the body in the past. It doesn't work. You have to be in the present moment to be solidly in the body. Likewise, the future. You can imagine, say, okay, I'm gonna tear the bindweed, the morning glories, away from the bushes so it doesn't kill them. And I even go through the future motions how I'm going to do this. And so in a sense, my body is there in the future. But only in a sense. The body is in the present moment only. And our possibility of raising the consciousness is in the present moment only. And the Western mystics say, well, eternity is in the present moment. So back to the motivation, something to contemplate that increases our motivation to practice, whatever the practice is we're considering. And that's called the four thoughts that turn the mind to the Dharma. So we concentrate on four facts, principles. The first of these is that the human life is precious, especially a human life that has the opportunity to practice Dharma, that has a connection with Dharma. If you think of the 9 billion people on the planet, how many of them have contacted the Dharma, even indirectly, through rumor? The opportunity to practice Dharma simply doesn't exist for most people. Now, for us, it exists. We've been drawn into circles where Dharma is practiced, so that's already something precious, and you can't count on it for the future. I mean, the whole situation could dissolve. We could get the big earthquake sometime soon, in which case we wouldn't be practicing much. So, again, the impetus is to practice now while we have the opportunity, while we have the all the conditions necessary for practicing. Because we didn't have that in the past, and there's no guarantee we'll have that in the future. So that becomes a motivation to do the practice now. Similarly, if you consider impermanence, and the impermanence now is so palpable that it's driving everybody strange. We can't keep up anymore. The electronic innovations are happening faster, and the so-called upgrades that confuse everybody with the new interface, those are happening faster and faster and faster. and the organic wetware units are having trouble keeping up. So impermanence then is in our face all the time in this era. At the time that the Buddha devised that principle, recognized that situation, things changed only very slowly. The minds were naturally moving more slowly. The social structure was moving very slowly. All of that is gone. The impermanence has speeded up. The other thing to consider is the fact of our incipient physical death. It's not going to go on forever. When you're adolescent, you're immortal. You just don't think about these things at all. But get to middle age and you realize, okay, how much time have I got left? And then the irony is we don't know. We don't know when we're going to die. We don't know how we're going to die. We just know that we are going to die. So that fact, if you consider it deeply, could drive you to practice as well. It's like time is short. Soon we'll be dead. Is there anything we can take with us to the next life? And one of the things we can take with us is the tendency to practice Dharma, or the tendency to study difficult treatises or whatever. So those tendencies are built up by our activity, and those apparently go with us across the bardo. The specifics, details of what our personality is or was, all that's gone. So the motivation is we want something that will last past the death, and the claim is that that's Dharma practice, one of the few things that lasts to the next life. The tendency to learn languages, the tendency to practice Dharma, the tendency to be drawn towards spiritual things. That's likely to remain. So the contemplation of death then brings us to, okay, what can we do about it really? Not much. But one thing we can do is practice spiritual arts, which are said to, again, to bridge the gap between this life and the next. Okay, so that's a motivator then. Another motivator for practicing is the defects of samsara, the fact that we're in suffering. We don't get what we want. Or we get what we wanted, but we can't hold on to it. Or we get what we don't want. And all of those various sufferings, even the good moments have something a little bit unsatisfactory about them. Not to spoil the good moments, but look at a good moment closely and you see, this isn't quite satisfying. There's something missing. That something missing is the spiritual dimensions that we've totally forgotten about in this culture. It used to be in the more ancient days that the existence of higher states of consciousness was well known, and the existence of practices that led to higher states of consciousness was well known in the traditional societies. That's long gone. And people are in despair. They have no idea what they might be able to do to satisfy their intrinsic longing. And that intrinsic longing can be a motivator also to practice this or that spiritual art. In our case, meditation, as the cornerstone of the Buddha Dharma. We have to, if we expect to get results from our Dharma practice, we need to meditate, we need to be mindful, we need to use that foundation stone. Otherwise, it's merely theoretical. And that's fine. There are a lot of people out there that are involved theoretically with the Dharma that don't practice at all. But they're missing out on something. The intent of the Dharma in the first place, is to practice in such a way as to create a transformation of consciousness to a higher level. Okay, so the fact that the samsara as we have it is impermanent and unsatisfactory could drive us to look for something else. And for us, that something else is mindful meditation. To start, you can get into deeper levels of concentration if you like. the four dhyanas and the formless attainments and all of that. But for practical purposes, laity living busy lives, the essential thing is the mindfulness meditation. And then whatever measure of concentration you can generate, to practice on that. But mindfulness is absolutely essential. 3 kinds of suffering in samsara: the suffering of change, our reaction to impermanence, we've covered that. The suffering of suffering, that's like physical pain is suffering. Emotional anguish is suffering. So we all have those sufferings. And then there's the all-pervading suffering, which is the suffering having to do with the limitations of being in a body, of having senses that are imperfect, of having a mind that doesn't attend to enough relevant detail. We have all of those sufferings. We look to the cause, and we say karma and cause and effect is the root of our suffering. And it has to do with the imprints in the mind that are created when we habitually repeat an action. Say, I'll use murder as an example. Those that have killed have in their mind stream a tendency to kill, and it becomes part of their makeup. I met a mercantile soldier in a bar, and we had a long conversation. And he had tasted blood somewhere in South America or Central America, and he had that mark on his mind stream that he had killed, and the possibility of killing again because of that habit pattern. Now, most of us haven't killed anybody for quite a few lifetimes now, though in the ancient past we probably did. And since the previous lives extend back into the dim past as far as you want to go, certainly we've committed every offense sometime in our long careers as sentient beings. So we have karma to burn, so to speak. We have karmic seeds. They're going to sprout and create when the conditions are conducive, an old karmic habit can re-arise. That being the case, if old karmic habits re-arise, then it could be from 3 lifetimes ago. We have no way of knowing. All we know for sure is we're in a situation that has to do with habitual patterns. So, that being the case, we need to loosen the hold that our habits have on us. So the possible thing to do would be to break some habits, especially any habits that are obstructive to the mindful meditation effort. Small habits are easier to break. Big habits become problematic, because they're ingrained. So that becomes an obstacle to the meditation then. The fact that we have non-conducive habits from past action. So in order to dissolve the habits that are obstacles to meditation, we need to work on actually breaking the habits. We need to work on our negative emotions. We need to restrain our behavior, which, again, most of the people here at Naland have already done. Our physical behavior is pretty well restrained. Not completely, of course, but pretty well. And likewise, we watch our tongues. Even those of us who maybe have a tendency to gossip a little bit, when we're talking about other people, we guard our tongues so as to not run down anybody. It's a slippery place because we're interested in other people, we're going to talk about them. But we don't want to be backbiting. We don't want to create division by over criticizing someone. So the restraint of speech is a little difficult in that area. But mostly, my motto for years in confrontations was, don't make it worse. There's a tendency to want to say exactly the wrong thing, push somebody's button, and restraining from doing that is very useful. So we can have an effect on our karmic past by dealing with those things as they come up. I have a negative emotion. I had various resentments for years. And every time it came up, I just, forgiveness. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it wouldn't work, of course. It comes up again and I'm as resentful as ever. But guaranteed, you keep chipping away at those negative emotions and eventually they recede. And then there's another subtle obstacle to Dharma practice. You get in the zone, so to speak. You've practiced the scrupulous ethics. You've practiced the sitting and the study, and things get better. So you put it all on cruise control. I don't get angry much anymore. I just don't usually. And sometimes I'll get irritated. My suspender comes undone when I'm trying to do something. I have to stop and reattach it or something. So there's a moment of irritation there. But then the next moment I'm laughing at myself. How ridiculous to be irritated over that. You just do whatever you need to do to fix it. So those things come up in various patterns and combinations. But the bottom line is we increase our resistance to reactivity. So we simply don't react to situations that used to set us off. I can, even though I've worked on this stuff, I can get set off. But it doesn't happen very often. Okay, then the problem is you can get complacent. I'm in a good place. I have a peaceful life. I'm relatively content. Why not just be settling for that? Why try for the third dhyana or the fourth dhyana or the formless attainments when you don't need to? Things are good as is. And unfortunately, all these negative emotions, the fundamental darkness, the ignorance that drives everything, the greed, hate, and delusion that arise out of the fundamental ignorance, and then the other emotions, pride and jealousy, making up 5 major poisons, 22 minor poisons poisoning our mind stream. So we want to attenuate all that. Great, it works. But I'm in the place where I'm tired of practicing. I'm in the place where I'm relatively okay the way things are going. But what has happened is the roots of these negative emotions still exist in the deep mind. So the Dharma practice is not done. Because then we have to dive deeper and we have to remove the roots of these negative emotions. Otherwise, you stop practicing. Within 6 months, you're more or less like everybody else, getting set off over trivial things and so on and so on. The stuff comes back. And in order to get the roots out, that's where the deeper Dharma practice is required. And then if we want to get to the Darshana Marga, to the path of seeing, where emptiness is fully understood and we see the entire path spread out before us, for that to happen, we need to dig these negative emotions out at the root. So these things can take time. But you can see the progression. You start out at first, Dharma practice is unknown. Then you get wind of something, you decided to try it, but you weren't any good at it, so you went away. Okay, so you didn't go away, you stubbornly kept at it until you arrived at a decent amount of mindful meditation. And sure enough, the life got better, more content, more calm and peaceful. You don't get set off nearly as often. And rather than let that be sufficient, then you need to dive to the next level, which is the yoga marga. We're on the path of accumulation, where we accumulate merit and wisdom by various practices. When you get on the yogic path, the path of penetration, then the practice gets difficult and intense. But in order to achieve a measure of enlightenment, the path of seeing, it needs to get intense for a while. I don't know how long. I've been only momentarily in that intense practice mode. And you have to keep it up for quite a while. You have 4 levels. It's called heat, summits, patience, and supreme mundane dharmas. And the heat, they explain it as the warmth of the Dharma sun being experienced and the aspiration to realize emptiness. Even though I haven't seen it written down, it's my opinion that the heat is really yogic heat, that the heat you generate by intense practice. And then summits, well, that's the crest of the effort. Patience entails repeating the same process. You climb the mountain like Sisyphus in the mythology, and it gets away and you start at the bottom again and you climb it again, and you keep doing that, patiently adding effort to the intense practice until there's a breakthrough to the Lokikagra Dharma, the top of the world. That's the highest point of samsara that you can reach, is beyond the summit of that effort. And from there, it's only a short leap into emptiness, and making that leap, then you have a moment of full awakening. And the rest of the path consists in cultivating that moment of awakening so that it is 24/7, which takes a long time. That's the practice of cultivation. But once you've had that moment of awakening, then the perspective changes utterly, and the motivation to practice is there. But we need to patiently start where we are and work on whatever we need to work on next. And to me, having that beacon in the distance, I could have a moment of full awakening, and then I could practice what I understood during that moment and try to repeat it, so to speak. It never repeats. That's the thing about those moments. If you think about moments of higher consciousness that you had, say, I used to get it in the woods once in a while. You're in the middle of the wilderness and you open up to the nature and it's wonderful. That's a moment of higher consciousness. And we all have a few of them that are gratuitously given. But if we want to cultivate them, it takes work. And then the reverse is also to be kept in mind. It's like a very delicate balance. Nothing excessive, but nothing too little either. So if you lose the sense of humor, then that's a pity, because the sense of humor is, essential to human well-being, I think. And, this is serious business, so people tend to get into seriosity, but that ain't it either. It's like we got to keep the balance. And keeping the balance seems to be what we're for. Okay, to restrain our behavior, body, speech, and mind, follow the precepts, adopt scrupulous ethics, along with increasing altruism. Now the next topic is called the 8 worldly concerns. And initially when I wrote this up, I tried to start at the outer periphery where you just hear about the Dharma, extending the range then, the struggle to actually begin practicing. And a major obstacle to momentary practice is what are called the 8 winds, or the 8 worldly concerns. And these are things that tend to throw us off course. And they're in 4 pairs. Happiness and unhappiness are likely to throw us off course. to take us away from our concentrated center. Because something happens, I win the lottery, I'm going to be elated. That elation is taking us away from the focus on the Dharma. Likewise, I'm unhappy. I'm too busy wallowing in my misery to do any practice. So happy, unhappy has to be balanced, and neither one is to cause us to deviate from our effort to practice Dharma. Similarly, gain and loss. When I lose it, I'm not so happy, but that doesn't prevent me from making an effort to be aware in the present moment. And likewise, I gain something, not to gloat a little bit, and to get into all those negative emotions, but simply accept it that, okay, I won that time, oh, I lost that time. Equal taste, balanced. Hard to do, but worth aspiring to. And then likely the other two pairs are praise and blame. You obviously prefer to be praised than blamed. But to be in a mental state where either one has the same non-effect is a real boon if you can get there. And likewise, fame and infamy. I would not like to have my reputation go down the toilet. And it happens to people sometimes. And likewise, if I have too good a reputation for how I'm constructed, then that's not good either, because it's problematic, because it's not real. And present moment Dharma practice has to be real. It has to be authentic. So we take whatever we are, and bring that to the cushion, and work on that wherever we are. So the 8 winds prevent us from focusing on the Dharma practice that we've generated. And then the rest of this is nuts and bolts from the foundational practices. There's the famous 5 hindrances, which are crucial to the doctrine. It's kind of dry stuff, but I'll go through it. The first dhyana is the initial concentration, the first time that you're in deep concentration. And it has 5 attributes, and the 5 hindrances inhibit those attributes. So an attribute of the first consciousness is a one-pointed mind. You can focus it on a single instant. And sense desire hinders that. Now, sense desire is either erotic or having to do with the tendency of an organ to seek an object, like good smells. I like incense, so I'll light some incense, drawing that object to me. But to have one-pointed mind at the same time as that desire doesn't seem to be possible. In a given instant you can be one-pointed, but there's no desire at that moment. Similarly, in the first dhyana you get bliss, rapture. And in ordinary people that's hindered by the thoughts of malice. In other words, the negative emotion coming up blocks the joy, blocks the bliss. And similarly, there's a thing called vitarka, which is glossed as initial application of thought. And this vitarka is part of the mind mechanism when the mind first focuses on an object of meditation. So vitarka is the first focus, and that's hindered by laziness, by sloth and torpor. And then for the other two, there's sukha, mental ease. Again, contentment, mental ease. Mental ease is hindered by restlessness and worry. I should mention that sukha and dukkha are a pair of opposites that are key in the exposition of Dharma. Dukkha is glossed as suffering. It actually is more like lack. Something is missing. something is unsatisfactory. Rather than outright pain and agony, we're talking about a mental state called dukkha, which involves dissatisfaction at some level. Now it turns out that dukkha refers to the axle of a wheel that hangs. It's like every time the wheel turns, it hangs up on a spot. That's dukkha. The axle doesn't turn smoothly because there's an obstacle. Sukha, ease, is when the axle turns freely. There's no resistance. And so this opposite of sukha and dukkha goes like a thread through the Dharma. And it says that the sukha in meditation is hindered by restlessness and worry. So the fact that the mind is distracted all the time reduces the possibility of mental ease. So we want to get to that place of mental ease. Then vichara, after vitarka, you put the mind to an object. Then vichara is you mull over that object. You discursively think about that object. You do directed thinking about that object. That's vichara. And it's hindered by doubt. Either this is a false dharma, doesn't get me anywhere, that series of doubts, or I can't do it. Maybe other people can do it, but I can't do it. And either of those kinds of doubts inhibits the ability to arrive at focus on the object of meditation. So there are antidotes to all these things. For doubt, study of scripture is an antidote. For restless and worry, which blocked mental ease, there is quietude of mind. For sloth and torpor, the antidote is recollection of death. Here I am being lazy, good grief, I'm going to die. If I want to get to a state of awakening, I've got to do it. So does that get us out of our sloth and torpor? Sometimes it does. And then faith overcomes the malice. Because to the extent that we have faith and confidence in the Dharma, our malice goes away. Okay, and then there's the famous 5 roots, the indriyas: faith, vigor, mindfulness, concentration, and wisdom. And those two conquer the hindrances. And I'll just read the list. Faith overcomes malice. Vigor destroys sloth and torpor. Okay. Mindfulness overcomes sense desire. Now that one is worth pondering. If I have a desire to hear some beautiful music, how mindful am I? I put the music on and then I forget to listen to it. So mindfulness overcomes sense desire. Concentration overcomes restlessness and worry. And wisdom destroys doubt. Okay, now applying these antidotes, we have to avoid 5 faults. Laziness, not making the effort. We've all got that. Forgetting the techniques and instructions, that's easy to do too. I forgot what I'm supposed to do in this meditation. Or I forgot to do the meditation at all. So if you forget the techniques, you can't do the meditation. If the mind sinks or scatters, the concentration is lost. That's not good. If you don't apply the antidote, doesn't matter if you know the antidote if you don't apply it, or if you over-apply it. If you over-apply the antidote, then the antidote doesn't work. It just causes more restlessness and worry. Okay, 2 more of these things. They really are crucial in the details of trying to sort out a deeper practice, but they're kind of tedious, a little bit dry. 10 fetters that bind us to the wheel of samsara. This is straight out of the original Buddha word, and I don't know how they applied this in the old days, but these are the 5 gross fetters. Sakaya Drishti, and that's glossed as mistaking the process of the five skandhas for a permanent self. This is something that everybody in the world does. They think this process of five skandhas is a self, and then that self, that ego, needs to be protected. And defenses are built up, and there's a whole psychological structure that goes along with that then. So the mistaking the process of the five skandhas for a self is something that every Buddhist needs to start reversing. This is just a process. There's no self in it. Wherever that sense of self comes from, it doesn't come from the skandhas. It doesn't come from our experience in the world. And this experience in the other world is pretty seldom. But at least we take the view then that these five skandhas are us. Just a process of rising and falling of dharmas. And that's what constitutes our moment-by-moment experience. If there's something else, we need to get into deep concentration to discover it. Okay, doubt about the efficacy of the path, clearly. And if you don't believe it works, you're not going to practice it. Or if you don't believe you can do it, you're not going to practice it. And the fact is, anybody can do it, but it's a matter of applying the necessary energy. Okay, attachment to rules and rituals. We don't have that. But there, especially in the monasteries, you get people that are so caught up in the practices of ritual activity that they're attached to those things. And the rules and rituals are there to help us wake up. They're not there for us to identify with and then use as a bludgeon against other people, which is a common feature of people that are attached to rules and rituals. Then kama raga, craving for sensuality. Everybody's got that. And even though kama means physical love in Hindu, I think that it's actually twofold. Craving for sensuality in the erotic sense, and craving for sensuality just in the mode of the senses attaching to an object. You get into a sensory deprivation tank, and there's no sensory input, and all kinds of weird things happen to the mind because we're used to this constant sense contact. And we take a joy in pure sense contact, and we seek it out. And removing that is difficult, but it's one step along the way to gain control over the sensory apparatus. So we can choose to look at that tree or not. We can be take the sense contacts out of the automatic range and be intentional about. I prefer incense to shoveling shit. Most of us do. But the smell organ wants to attach to any smell. Even an unpleasant smell. Like you go into a new room and the carpet outgassing. That to me is a bad smell. But the smell organ is going to seek that smell out because it's in the space. And likewise, flashing lights, the eye is drawn to them automatically. So we want to be a little bit more intentional about our sense contacts in general. The last of the gross fetters is malice. And you notice, or you might have noticed, that these various ways of characterizing obstacles repeat. Like pride is in several of these lists. Malice is in several of these lists. So if you were going to apply these, work on them, you'd pick one. I'm going to work on the subtle fetters, and then you might pick one of those to work on. So the information is there and it can be used. But just going through it like a laundry list is slightly tedious. But here we go, there are 5 subtle fetters. these subtle feathers, craving for existence in the form world. That's the world above this one. We're in the desire world. There's the desire world, the form world, and the formless world. And the form world is where the dhyanas are. If you're in concentration, you're dealing with the form world beyond the desire world. And then craving for existence in the formless world. That's even higher up, but it could be a craving. And the craving itself is the problem, not the formless world. Okay, then pride. Pride is ubiquitous. And just as a key fault of the Christian path, a key side track is hypocrisy. With Buddhism, the main sidetrack is pride, because you get to the place where you see through a lot of things, and then you could arrive at the mistaken notion that you're somehow better than other people because you have these insights. So since the insights are real, it's harder to get rid of the pride because there's an actual gain. But the pride is an obstacle. And there are 7 kinds of it, and the scholastic details go on. But basically, the pride keeps us from that final darshan, that final view of the emptiness, that final view of the path, or that pivotal view of the path, I should say, because it's not the final state, but it's the essential minimum. We're not bodhisattvas until we've had that moment of realization, until we've had that vision of the path. Up till that time, we're followers of bodhisattvas, and it's hard to find the actual bodhisattvas because they're way too rare in this time and place. Okay, besides pride, there's mental restlessness, and ignorance. And then there's a note, all 10 of these fetters are dissolved when you reach the state of arhatship. That's because these are original teachings, so the arhat was the goal. But basically, if you're enlightened, then those gross and subtle fetters no longer exist in your mind stream. Okay, one more, and that's the 7 anushayas. This is in the Abhidharma. And I wrote anushas are proclivities, subtle predispositions. So they're not even negative emotions yet. They're, as it were, the seeds of a negative emotion. And it goes through a similar list, the 7 of them: kama raga, sensual craving; hostility instead of malice, but it really boils down to the same thing, different word; pride, again, one of the key things that creates unwholesome mental states; drishti, wrong views; doubt; craving for continued existence. That would cover Bhava Raga as being or becoming. So that would include the desire for the desire world, craving for the form world, or craving for the formless world. All that would be Bhava Raga, craving for continued existence. And that's a pretty subtle impulse. And that's biological survival, craving for continued existence. And then finally, the keynote of the entire series of negative emotions, ignorance, not seeing reality as it is. I had a note there: these anushas persist in the mind stream life after life. Strong yogas are required to uproot them. So, that's an approximate view of the stages of the path and the obstacles to treading that path. And even though you won't remember the details, you got the gist. And that's basically what we're up against. Any kind of meditation is a good thing, and no effort is wasted, I'll say that. But start where you are and work it from there. Enough said. Thank you.